All right, boys and girls, we are back with another edition of The Big Ben Show. I'm your host, Ben Domenech. You can follow me on X at bdomenech. Follow the show on X and Instagram at Big Ben Show Fox. We appreciate so much your comments and weighing in and sharing of all the different clips that my team has been putting up. And we're back on The Big Ben Show. I'm happy to welcome in studio my guest, Brian Cox. You can follow him on X at Brian Cox _ RLTW for Rangers Lead the Way. He is a professor at Cornell Law, a former U.S. member of the U.S. Army. He's retired since 2018. I have become familiar with your views on X, and as people have been reacting to them in the past couple of weeks, sharing them because you had, I think, a pretty interesting and informed perspective on everything that went down surrounding the debate regarding what we've seen play out in the Gulf and underneath the auspices of this stepped up and more aggressive campaign against the narco terrorists that we've seen come out of the Department of Defense, now Department of War. Right. You, in terms of your reaction to it, had, I think, a pretty contrarian take from the get-go, but one that obviously also proved to have, I think, some pretty good anticipation of where that story would go. What were your initial thoughts when you heard about the Washington Post report and everything that we're now familiar with in terms of the kill 'em all order and everything like that?
Yeah, so my initial take was that there's a lot of speculation that it's an important story that the Washington Post broke. They had anonymous sources who were trying to put an audience in the room for these decisions, especially the first decision to attack the very first narco trafficker boat, and so it was a good story to read, but it just left so many gaps, and so because there was so much speculation, it was really difficult to draw really concrete determinations on whether the initial strike was lawful, whether subsequent strikes were lawful, and just because there was so much unknown, I really wanted to point that out and say, listen, there's more to come here, and this is not really enough to base hard legal determinations on.
I think that one of the things that is very apparent with this situation was that from that initial report, there was a group of people who were ready and eager to jump on it. Right. Obviously, we had the video beforehand that came out from Mark Kelly and others that had been a real shot across the bow to the people who are carrying out these orders, suggesting that they might be doing things that are illegal and there would be consequences for them, that they were obligated to disobey or not follow an order that they believed to be illegal. We saw Mark Kelly go on Meet the Press and be unable to answer himself whether he would have conducted the strike if ordered to or not. One thing that I do think, though, that became clear after we had the additional reporting from the New York Times, after we had the additional reporting from ABC and the Wall Street Journal and others, is that this story is more complicated than that, and that there's a lot more nuance to go around, and that the definitive one that the Washington Post ran with, as Britt Hume said, it was an exclusive report and it remained exclusive for a reason. What was your take after you had that second round, third round of information flow in about the way that this strike was undertaken?
It's the information that's coming out now is really starting to fill in the blanks, and of course we're still getting anonymous sources reporting on the briefings that various military members have given behind closed doors to Congress, and so there is still the element of uncertainty regarding exactly what happened. But based on my experience, advising on international law in Afghanistan, in an operational environment, I just took for granted that, listen, there was, legal advice, real-time legal advice that was being given, and that has come out to be accurate. That, there was a JAG, a judge advocate, who's actually there providing legal advice, and it doesn't seem consistent with my experience that we would just attack something for no reason. That there's got to be, more than likely some reason that the commander that was responsible decided to engage in that second strike. And so now that the information is coming out that he assessed that the portion of the capsized boat that was staying afloat was doing so because cocaine was underneath it, and it's lighter than water, and so that was what was keeping it afloat. And according to anonymous reporting, his decision for this secondary strike was to destroy the cocaine that remained. And so the pieces that are coming into place now are starting to invalidate this initial report that the order was to kill them all, and that's what they did.
The other element of it that really stuck out to me as being just it seemed to be something that aroused a lot of skepticism, not just from me, but from others as well, was this idea that there was a second verbal order from the Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth, to kill them all,
right.
And that was what drove the decision. In the process of these strikes, and typically, and you can speak from your own experience with this, you just don't go into situations like this with the idea that you're going to make decisions on the fly, in the sense that there is a plan typically for, okay, well, what happens if this occurs or if that occurs? Certainly that was something that we saw quite a bit of, within the context of the war on terror and the drone usage then. Is this a situation where, now that you know a good bit more, you feel like they were fully prepared for the eventuality that they would face if this strike, did not fully destroy the target?
Absolutely. It sounds to me, again, based on anonymous reporting that's come out, or reporting from anonymous sources that's come out afterwards, that they had ISR, so intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance assets in the area so that they could monitor not only the initial strike, but then stay on the objective to determine whether the commander's intent was met. And the commander's intent is, to destroy the drugs, the boat, and the personnel who are taking direct part in hostilities by conveying the drugs in the boat. So that's the commander's intent, and it seems very clear that they were prepared to assess whether the commander's intent was met initially, and if it wasn't, that they would just do what we do in the military, is to reassess and reattack.
You are obviously aware of the different legal requirements that are placed upon commanders who are put in this situation.
Yeah.
What is your level of distinct concern regarding the decisions that have been made generally about this campaign against these narco-terror boats? How much do you think that the skeptics who have been arguing, including, some people who are very respected people on the right, I would include Rand Paul in their number, who are generally skeptical of a lot of these things, saying that you have to go to Congress for approval, you have to get the sign off from others. If you're going to be conducting something under the auspices of war, et cetera, you need an authorization for it. Do you think that this rises to that level? Do you think that the president has the authority to do what he's been doing and what the Department of War has been doing under his auspices?
Absolutely. So the Congress has the authority to declare war. That's Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution. But not every armed conflict constitutes war. And so the classic paradigm of United States going to war, literally war, against Japan and Germany in World War II, that required and received congressional resolution. But there's a long history dating back to the founding of the executive using force, armed force, short of war, without congressional authority, and this is well within Article 2, Commander-in-Chief authority within the Constitution.
The questions that have been raised are obviously ones that will be given a hearing on Capitol Hill. Rand Paul, among others, has said that there needs to be testimony from Pete Hegseth. There seems to be some skepticism from Roger Wicker, in particular, the powerful senator at the head of the Armed Services Committee on the Senate side, about the communication, at least, that they are receiving from the Department of Defense on this score. They feel like they've been left out of the loop, at least according to some of the staffers that I've talked to. Do you think that that's a situation that will be helpful in terms of bringing more things to light, or is this just kind of grandstanding, given that this does seem to have significant support among the American people? I mean, the latest Harvard-Harris poll that just came out shows a 58 to 42 support for this type of measure. You don't see a lot of things like that occur underneath this president. so that kind of 60-40 paradigm is not something that they are used to experiencing. What do you think about the congressional interest here? Do they have an interest? Is it valid for them to be saying we need to know more?
No, I'm really concerned about this because this is one example of many that Congress needs to read the Constitution and stay in their lane, right? So they have plenty of constitutional authority. They have appropriations authority. They have the authority to declare war. Article 1, Section 8 gives them robust authority, but it doesn't include second guessing the executive, looking after tactical decisions, and calling for testimony from commanders who are responsible for tactical decisions. And so there's an inherent element of politics that gets involved. When Congress is exercising what it refers to as its oversight authority, this is part of a broader trend of members of Congress claiming oversight as a way to expand their authority in relation to the executive.
I'm going to ask you a question that my friend Hugh Hewitt put to me this past week when I chatted with him on Friday, as I typically do, which is, what would be the scenario or what would be the response if some of these narco-terror boats, these drug boats that are obviously, despite the fact that they are framed as being run by fishermen, not fishing boats in any way, shape, or form, if they actually started to put innocent civilians, bystanders, or essentially hostages, people who would make us look bad, strap a kid to the boat kind of a thing.
Right.
What type of scenario would happen in that instance if one of these strikes were to take place?
Yeah, that's actually a really interesting point. It's something I hadn't really thought of. So there is a contested legal basis for engaging in armed conflict, and we can have that discussion separately from whether the conduct of hostilities. And so the political entities, the president, Secretary of War, but especially the president, they decide that an armed conflict exists. Then it's up to the troops to comply with the law of armed conflict. So the law of armed conflict rule there would be proportionality, and the commander who is involved would have to would have to look at the anticipated incidental harm, so the collateral damage, and then the expected concrete and direct military gain to be had from engaging in the strike. And if the expected incidental harm is clearly excessive in relation to the concrete and direct military advantage, then the commander would have to, pursuant to the law of armed conflict, refrain from engaging in that strike.
Why do you think, other than the obvious, which is, of course, that it's Donald Trump and so everything gets more crazy attention, why do you think that there was so much less backlash about the completely, baseless decision that the Biden administration made in the aftermath of the Afghanistan withdrawal to drone a vehicle that it turned out had nothing to do with what they were initially announcing it did? There seemed to be less complaints about that raised at the time. Certainly, I don't recall them, and none of the people involved in this current discussion talking about the different 6 members of that video team. None of them really seem to have. There's no record of them coming forward to have criticized the administration during that time, for anything other than just the factual mistake in terms of intelligence. Why do you think that basically was allowed to skate by when this has created so much consternation?
I mean, I do think that there's a political element to both.
Yeah.
The Kabul drone strike, as it's often referred to there at near the end of the withdrawal, that was also a tactical decision that was made by a commander at the time, just like the second strike on this boat in the Caribbean. And so both of these involve a inherently tactical decision to engage in a strike, and the apparent difference, the clear difference is one of them was with President Biden in office, and one of them is with President Trump in office. And so this is a political vehicle, if you will, to generate criticism that can be directed through the military up to the senior political leadership. And I don't know that there was necessarily appetite to do that, certainly on the left, at the time for the Kabul drone strike.
What are the key aspects of the law governing these strikes that you'd like for lay people and even for, I would say, commentators and people who are weighing in on this without military backgrounds, to know about the way that these rules work, because a lot of the time I think people are weighing in on them without necessarily having the benefit of someone that they can talk to and ask, okay, what's the real deal with this?
Right. So the law of armed conflict is inherently permissive, whereas human rights law, as the counter paradigm, is inherently restrictive. And so a lot of the discussion right now about the legality of the strikes ends up kind of mixing up the law involving the resort to force. So in kind of international law parlance, we call that use ad bellum. So people are saying you can't engage in these strikes because you don't have lawful authorization to begin with, which is an important discussion to have. Certainly, it is a contested legal basis. But once that decision has been made, that by the political leadership, yes, we are engaged in an armed conflict, then we have to understand that the people who are prosecuting this armed conflict on behalf of the executive, they are applying law of armed conflict. It's not their decision to determine which body of law applies, whether there's an armed conflict or not. This is civilian control of the military. If we don't want the military deciding on its own when it should go to war or engage in armed conflict, then we have to vest that decision in civilian leadership. And so that decision has been made, and now military members are carrying out those orders saying you are in an armed conflict, apply the law of armed conflict. And when they do, LOAC, law of armed conflict, is inherently permissive, unlike our standard framework of human rights law.
Mm-hmm. The way that these laws govern the decisions, they go through a process of there's decisions that are made within the Pentagon, within the defense structure about various things. What's the process that they go through in terms of being assessed by the legal authorities within the defense structure?
Yeah, so my understanding, the memorandum that determined that there is an armed conflict in this case hasn't been made public, but my understanding is that there is a memorandum that exists that was generated by the Department of Justice Office of Legal Counsel, and so which is common. It's pretty typical for some element within the government to be asked a question. So what very likely, and this is just speculation from me based on my experience, but what very likely happened is either the president or a senior civilian official went to the Department of Justice and said, okay, this is what's going on in the Caribbean and in South America. We assess that this qualifies as an armed conflict, and we would like to determine, we'd like an official determination whether this does qualify. And so there has been, that process, as far as I'm aware, has been followed, and there has been a memorandum that the administration is relying on that has been published by the Department of Justice Office of Legal Counsel saying, yes, we are in an armed conflict.
The aspects of this that are going to be up to review from Congress, of course, include the potential expansion of this conflict, which has obviously been discussed in the public square quite a bit. The impression that has been taken by a number of critics, or advanced by a number of critics, is that it's a preface to a regime change war in Venezuela, or perhaps just dipping the toe in the water towards something like that. The impression that I personally have, and that many of the others who've been paying a lot of attention to the drug war issues over the last several years, is that this is as much a message to Venezuela as it is to Mexico about getting their own house in order. I've written on that a couple of times now. What is your impression about that, just as someone who's observing it? Do you think that this is setting up a logical ramp up for some kind of major regime change war that would be, especially considering the president's background, a pretty big step in a much more hawkish direction than the tone that he has adopted in the past?
To me, it just seems unlikely. So based on the president's, my understanding of President Trump's, value in terms of when the United States military should be used to intervene in foreign matters. He tends to take, in this. So the example that comes to mind for me as a case study is the attack against the nuclear capabilities of Iran. So this required a lot of military planning, a lot of military force, but he was able to authorize this in a way that minimized the likelihood of the United States getting bogged down in an Iraq or an Afghanistan type of campaign. And I see the prospect of a regime change war in Venezuela to be something similar to Iraq or Afghanistan. It just doesn't seem to me that's something that the president would have an appetite for.
I share your skepticism. The other aspect of this that I think people are underestimating a bit is that the president is, it seems like the president is very much focused on the idea of focusing on our own hemisphere and prioritizing the issues that are close to home. I don't think that Americans have a particular appetite to start seeing boots on the ground in Venezuela, which it seems to me would be required as part of any kind of effective campaign. Do you believe that, just as someone who's observing this and paying attention to the issue, that what is being done in the Gulf of America in these international waters is something that advances that hemispheric control goal and is part of sending a message along those lines?
The administration recently published a national defense strategy that reinvigorates the Monroe Doctrine, and I see the boat strikes and the controversy about this have been going on before the national defense policy strategy has been published. But it all makes sense that that the administration is wants to readopt and reinvigorate the Monroe Doctrine to focus on our hemisphere, the Western Hemisphere, and this is a way to exercise an assertive role in foreign relations here in this hemisphere.
There are going to be some major questions, I think, directed and continue to be directed today to the people who participated, including, Senator Kelly, Senator Slotkin, and the others in that video. What do you believe is the right message for people to take away from this about the decisions that members of the armed forces have to make on a regular, sometimes daily basis, depending on what kind of role they have, about the lawfulness of the orders that they are being given?
Right. So this is not an innocuous, innocent messaging campaign, just to remind our troops that they have an obligation to only follow lawful orders. We know that.
Yeah.
Speaking of someone who spent 22 years in the military, so I'm no longer in, but as a soldier, I know that my obligation is to obey only lawful orders. So pursuant to the Uniform Code of Military Justice, particularly Article 92, all troops have a duty to obey lawful orders, and they can not obey manifestly unlawful orders. But again, it's not up to at the troop level, at the tactical level, to determine we are in the United States is in an armed conflict, and you are applying law of armed conflict. That is a political, civilian, strategic level decision, and we at the tactical level, operational tactical level, we are told you are in an armed conflict, so obey lawful orders, which is engage in these strikes, but comply with law of armed conflict while you're doing it.
The one aspect of this that seems recurring to me is that there are a lot of people, particularly on the left in this country, who would like to see a military that is more resistant to Donald Trump in every aspect, that basically defies him. Personally, I find that to be the height of just rejecting everything that America's system is about, in the sense that civilians have to be in charge. Elections have to matter. They have to be the decision makers. We elect a commander in chief. I don't care whether it's Barack Obama, Donald Trump, or Joe Biden.
Exactly.
It is a person who has to make that decision, who is elected by the people, and we should not be in the business of advocating for some kind of quote unquote noble general who just rejects what the president tells him to do. How did we get to a point where the left, which typically likes to position itself as being anti-authoritarian, historically, and anti, military authority in particular. I mean, especially culturally, you see so many elements of that. Why do they basically want somebody who's going to go Colonel Kurtz on the Trump administration to such a degree? I would have thought that they would have learned from this by now that that's just not a solution.
Yeah, it's an attempt to subvert command authority.
Yeah.
They're not happy with who is in office right now, and so it's hard to ignore the political dynamic that's at play here. That there wasn't an argument on the left that troops should refuse to follow President Obama's orders when he was engaged in drone strikes, throughout, especially in the Middle East, and that was a novel development at the time. And so, I would expect that if they're concerned, if the left is concerned about strikes on narco-trafficker boats in the Caribbean, that they would also, the lawfulness of those, that they would also have been criticizing the decision by Obama to engage in drone strikes in the Middle East, and that just didn't happen. And so this is really there is a political dynamic at play, and this is just one vehicle to generate criticism of the current administration.
I'm reminded there's an old Bill Kristol tweet from in the yore of Twitter where he was talking about preferring the people at Langley and the Pentagon to Donald Trump, and I responded to him at the time, I prefer the elected to the unelected. That is just a rule that I think every American should support as key to the persistence of the American idea. We can't allow for that type of breakaway from the command structure.
That's right. I mean, you don't have to support the current commander-in-chief, whoever it is.
Yeah.
You don't have to support this person, whether it's Donald Trump or Joe Biden or Barack Obama, whoever. You don't have to support them, but they have been elected. And they have, pursuant to the Constitution, they have Article 2 Commander-in-Chief authority, regardless of whether you support them or not.
Yep, and I will be back here arguing that under President Jasmine Crockett, I'm sure, as long as she allows me to have a show. Right. Brian Cox is on X at @BrianCox_RLTW for Rangers Lead the Way. He is a professor at Cornell Law. Thank you so much for taking the time to join the Big Ben Show today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. It's been great.
You've been listening to another edition of The Big Ben Show. Thank you, as always, for tuning in. You can follow us on X and on Instagram at Big Ben Show Fox. I hope you'll leave a comment about your thoughts on the college football playoff, who you think belonged in, whether you're a fan of BYU or Vandy or one of the other folks who got left out, and what you think needs to happen in order to right the ship in that space. We'll be back next week with more to dive back into the fray.